On February 14th, 2012, I went for my 20-week ultrasound. This was my first pregnancy, and I was excited to find out the gender of my baby. I had had a couple ultrasounds very early in the pregnancy because of spotting, so I knew exactly what to expect, and I was beyond excited the entire day at work leading up to the appointment that afternoon. Boy or girl? Boy or girl is all I could think about. I was having a holiday baby. I found out about the pregnancy on Halloween. My ultrasound was on Valentine's Day, and I was due on Independence Day. This kid sure knew how to celebrate. My husband was in the room with me this time, so I was even more excited as we both really wanted a boy, but had not shared that desire with the multitude of people who had tried to guess over the previous weeks. The ultrasound took a while, so I had a lot of time to daydream of cute ways to reveal the gender to my mother. Yeah, I would surely tell my mother first, and I wondered if I could even wait until I got home or if I would just call her on the drive home and blurt it out. After a couple of hours of being poked and prodded and thinking nothing beyond, why is this taking so long? We were told I was done and I could get dressed. We were having a boy, and we were both elated. Hubby had to go to class and said he'd wait with me, but since all that was left was for the doctor to come in and do the usual spiel, I told him I'd be fine and to go ahead and leave. That was a mistake. The doctor, Dr. Ryan Longman, came into the room. Let me be very clear. He is not my OBGYN. He was just the doctor on staff at the facility where I got my ultrasound that day. Anywho, he came into the room and he said he had to do yet another ultrasound. This was my fourth or fifth in that session at this point. I had lost count. I asked what was going on, but no one would tell me. The ultrasound tech stepped aside and let Dr. Longman take control. Now, back on the table, wondering what was up, he began to press against my belly in a very uncomfortable and forceful way, with no warnings whatsoever. He kept saying my son was not in a good position to see whatever he was looking for, and kept thumping me in the stomach with the ultrasound machine. I'm going to make this baby upset, he said, while thumping. I'm assuming to get him to reposition himself. I remember thinking, you're making his mama upset. And in hindsight, I should have said those very words aloud. Finally, he told me I was done, again, and I got dressed, and then I heard words that would change my life forever. My baby, my son, my flicker bug, was developing with his spinal cord exposed. His brain was not developing properly. He may have a genetic disorder, and he may not live past 3 days post-birth. It was like someone hit a button and everything started happening in slow motion. I sat on the exam table staring at the doctor, but not totally hearing or comprehending much of what he was saying. It was like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 and I had to actively tell myself to focus and listen to his words and not just pitch myself off the table into a wailing, screaming pile of insanity on the floor next to him. He delivered the news very callously, no real emotion that I could detect, lots of long medical terms that I won't share right here, and then he topped it off with, well, you'll be 36 years old when you give birth, so what do you expect? Yeah, that happened. The ultrasound tech stood in the corner the entire time in silence. Our prior lighthearted conversation about fashion school seemed so frivolous at this point. I was still in slow motion when I asked the questions. I was still in slow motion when she wrote down the many negative diagnoses and handed them to me. I was still in slow motion when I got down from the table and left the room. I do not remember walking to my car, but I do remember somehow calling my husband and getting out. Don't go to class. Something is wrong with the baby. Before collapsing in a pile of tears in the parking lot in my car. It was not a good Valentine's Day. The drive home was Well, the drive home. Strangely enough, I felt my sanity slipping, so I started talking to God and telling him what was good about what he had made. I remember thinking about Jehoshaphat in the Bible and how the battle was not mine, and looking at the most beautiful red and orange sunset in front of me as I drove in traffic toward my home. Arriving at the house, and after another brief break of sanity, I collected my thoughts and decided to just put one foot in front of the other, because honestly, at that moment, that was all I could manage to do. I felt the long anticipated joy of that evening's gender reveal was stolen from me, and the world had imploded. For weeks I had waited for February 14th, 2012 to come so I could see my baby and find out if he was a he or he was a she, and instead I sat on my couch absolutely and purely in shock. In a moment of clarity, I told my husband that February 14th, 2013 was going to come whether we wanted it to or not. And we would either have the memory of a pregnancy and then a funeral, a pregnancy and a perfectly healthy baby, or a pregnancy and something in between the two. But it's coming no matter what, so we might as well trust God, and we might as well get there together. The following days and weeks were a circus. A more detailed test was done, and the various diagnoses were confirmed. I spent the following 3 weeks being offered many times to terminate my pregnancy. I chose not to terminate my son and to see what God would do. For the rest of the pregnancy, I was monitored constantly because my son was apparently underweight, 10th percentile to be exact. I was hooked up to machines 2 to 3 times a week, and many tests were done, although I did opt out of several. The medical professionals told me that he would not be able to do this or that, and this would be wrong, that would be wrong, or he would just die. I was told I had to have a scheduled C-section, which I did not want, and I was admitted to labor and delivery at week 34, but God blocked that, and I ended up going back home. I carried my son for 38 weeks. I went into labor, and he was born at 8 pounds 1 ounce. Strangely, no one said anything about the underweight thing after that. There were about 15 people in the operating room with me. In a haze of drugs from the spinal, I only glimpsed my son going by me in the isolette on his way directly to the NICU, right before I threw up once again from the medication. That night, my husband wheeled me over to the other hospital so I could meet my son for the first time. He was asleep in the baby toaster, and his back was covered with bandages. He had his first surgery the day after he was born, and several subsequent surgeries in the next 3 weeks. It got to the point where the anesthesiologist didn't even go over the pre-surgery spiel with us. They just said, "Oh, you know how this goes." After 3 weeks of constant surgeries were completed. After 4 weeks, I was no longer bloated from my operation, and I could walk and didn't have to be wheeled around. After 5 weeks, my son was discharged, and we brought him home. After 4 months, all of his wounds finally healed. He is now 1 week short of 8 months old. A 20-pound, happy, babbly, big, fat baby man. He was born with spina bifida, and he does have several physical challenges, but we have learned to take each day as it is given to us, and we leave the rest to God. I was not psychologically able to go through this experience with an audience, so I didn't. I barely told a soul. Only the core really knew. We prayed, we watched, and we waited. I'm in a different mental space now, so it's time to tell. I'm more often looking at him thinking, this is who they told me to terminate? These past 365 days have been the hardest of my life. I knew February 14th, 2013 was going to come. Valentine's Day 2012 ran me over like a Mack truck. But guess what? It's Valentine's Day 2013. And we made it. To God be the glory.